A druid stood in the Twelveswood. Bioluminescent moss pulsed beneath their boots, etheric tendrils coiled, stilled by unseen chains. The air hummed with restrained power. The elemental's law did not govern it caged. The 13th Reflection's handiwork thrives on coiled harmony. Gridania's silent pact drowns in the chain's weight of its harmony-gilded cage forged in shadow. What price did the 13th Reflection demand to still such fury? Thrives on etheric harmony. The yet weight of its drowns in the gilded weight of its cage, gilded cage. The elemental's law was installed by the 13th Reflection to bind the Sundering's fury a prison veiled as a hymn. They survived not by taming chaos but by burying it beneath roots and song. Their virtue, stewardship. Their wound, the knowledge that every blooming meadow is a shroud for ancient wrath. The Twelveswood's peace is no covenant, but a theft of time, its balance a fragile dam against currents that hunger to break. What did the 13th Reflection demand in return? Not obedience, not worship, the silence of what should never have been caged. The sundering by Venat as Hydaelyn did not sunder balance, it sundered will. From the source's breath rose the 13th Reflection a shadow, without shadow end, it named itself the convocation of 14. 14 voices spoke as one, 12 to bind, 1 to break. They did not summon Zodiark to duel Hydaelyn. They summoned both to seal what the final days might unmake. The elemental's law, a shackle forged in the 13th's forge. Gridania's oaks do not whisper harmony. They groan under the weight of a pact that was never theirs to make. The Twelveswood's roots drink from a poisoned well the lifeblood of forces meant to roam free. What did the 13th Reflection cage? The storm's raw scream, the earth's unyielding wrath, the fire that forgets to burn. The citizens of Gridania still chant the old hymns, unknowing. They praise the balance that is but a gilded chain. The elementals never gave this law. The elementals were its first prisoners. The convocation's voice remains unspoken, its name erased even from the oldest tomes. But the trees remember, the rivers remember. And in the marrow of every leaf that falls, a silence grows thick, unbroken, and vast as the final days it delays. The rivers remember. Gridania's breath was ether thick, its forests humming with a song older than the stars. Pine resin clung to the air like incense, and the earth pulsed with a rhythm no mortal hand could mimic. Here the Twelveswood's roots drank not water but raw power, their boughs cradling storms that never fell. The elemental's law they called Eda harmony, so perfect it bent time itself, but perfection is a mask, the 13th Reflection watched. From the void beyond the veil, it wove its chains in light and shadow. The convocation of 14, 12 gods and 2 mortals, did not bargain, they bartered. With Zodiark's name spoken in the tongue of the first, they shattered the mirror. The world split like a cracked shell, and Gridania's etheric heart was caged in its own splendor. No balance was struck. The law was a noose, and the elementals its executioners. Hydaelyn's light, so often called salvation, was but another thread in the 13th's tapestry. The Garlean skyships, Emhatch's towers, Ishgard's hymnsol built on a lie of order. The trees still whisper, their roots tangled in the remnants of a pact that was never theirs to make. What does a god fear enough to bind the world? The answer festers in the silence between the leaves. The convocation's act was not desperation, but calculation. Zodiark's awakening was not a mistake, it was a lock, and the key was lost with the sundering. Now the forests hold their breath. The Aetha, once wild and free, is tamed in the 13th's prison. Gridania's golden age was a requiem, sung in the key of captivity, and the rivers still remember. But memory is a heavy thing, heavier than law, heavier than gods. The 13th Reflection did not seek balance, they sought silence. In the ash of the sundering, they wove the elemental's law not as covenant but shroud. Gridania's trees no longer breathe freely. Their roots are bound in etheric chains. What harmony remains is the echo of a scream muffled by iron. The rivers remember the dragon song that once bent the sky. Now they flow in straight lines, their currents damped by the reflection's sigils. The beasts of the Twelveswood do not howl, they hum, a dirge and a key the cage allows. Did the reflection fear the primordial's rage, or its beauty? The cost of stillness is measured in stolen breath. In every leaf that dares to tremble, a suppressed storm, The elemental's law is no law, it is a wound sutured shut. And the wound festers, the land does not forgive, it does not forget. The 13th's hand trembles in the act of binding a crack in the voice, a fracture in the sky. What is tamed is not tamed forever. What is caged only waits to become what it was never meant to be. What is elemental's law caged is only a waits to become what it was promised, Nev, a promise that the world will one day burn. To remember is to grieve. To grieve is to remember, and the rivers still remember. The 13th Reflection did not seek balance, they sought silence. In the ash of the sundering, they wove the elemental's law not as covenant but shroud. Gridania's trees no longer breathe freely. Their roots are bound in etheric chains. What harmony remains is the echo of a scream muffled by iron. The rivers remember the dragon song that once bent the sky. Now they flow in straight lines, their currents damped by the reflection's sigils. The beasts of the 12's wood do not howl, they hum, a dirge and a key the cage allows. Did the reflection fear the primordial's rage, or its beauty? The cost of stillness is measured in stolen breath. In every leaf that dares to tremble, a suppressed storm. The elemental's law is no law, it is a wound sutured shut. Of festers the land does gnaw, it does not forget. The 13th's hand trembles in the act of binding a crack in the voice, a fracture in the sky. What is tamed is not tamed forever. What is caged only waits to become what it was never meant to be. The elemental's law is a promise that the world will one day burn. To remember is to grieve. To grieve is to remember, and the rivers still remember. The final days began with a note, a single shivering tone from Hydaelyn's throat, sharp as a blade through the silence. Gridania's rivers boiled, the trees screamed. The 13th Reflection's cage cracked. For 7 days, dynamis poured from the sky like rain-black, singing hungry. The people of the 12's wood watched their forests twist, roots gnawing at their own bark in madness. The law, that brittle hymn of balance, could not name this, could not contain it. The air reeked of ozone and burnt honey. Children's toys melted in their hands. The elders who had sworn to the silent pact stood mute as the ground split, revealing not roots but coiled shadows, ancient and grinning. The law had called them elementals, the truth was worse, they were prisoners and the pact was the lock. Hydaelyn's song had not summoned chaos, it had unplugged a drain. On the 7th night the sky split, not metaphor. A fissure, jagged and bleeding, where the 13th's prison had been. The stars above Gridania dimmed, swallowed by a hunger that had no name. The people fled, but the trees would not let them go. Branches lashed, roots dragged, as if the land itself feared what lay beyond. The law's harmony was a noose, tightening as it pretended to cradle. The survivors remember the sound of the cage breaking. Not a roar, but a sigh, 1,000 years of pressure released in a whisper. The 13th's fix, that desperate temporary weave of light and lie, unraveled like a thread. What lay beneath, not balance, not order. A void that hummed with the weight of freedom. And still, the wind carries a question, not why but how long. How long had the law's cage stretched its fingers into dreams, into birth and breath? How long before the next song, the next rupture? Gridania's harmony was never a hymn, it was a death rattle. The trees remember. The rivers remember. What will the people do when the shadows inside them begin to sing? The echo's truth split the 12's wood's heart. Gridania's people now see the law as a shackle, not a hymn. The 13th's hand was there all along. A cage of light bound roots and river, binding what should never be tamed. Canny Senna walks its edges, blade and vow unyielding. The silent pact holds, though its silence is no longer trust but fear. The warrior of light's revelation left a chasm. To unmake the law is to unmake the world's bones. Yet to keep it is to kneel to a god who wears salvation like a mask. Rulers whisper in shadowed halls. The archdruid's mantle now weighs with doubt. The people tend their fields, but their hands tremble. Every sapling is a question. Every storm a reckoning. The trees remember, the rivers remember. The 13th's design is a slow unraveling. Gridania's heart beats in the space between obedience and oblivion. What does a forest do when its roots are chains? They grow. They break, they bleed. The cost of freedom is measured in blood and starlight. The silent pact is not broken. It is being rewritten, one word at a time, one scar at a time. The law's cage still hums. But inside it, a new song rises. Canny Senna, the Convocation's blade, carved obedience into the Twelveswood's heart with every hymn of the law. The warrior of light, raised to revere the sacred script, saw its glyphs as a gilded chain, each verse a lock on the elemental's true will. Elidibus, architect of the Sundering, did not shatter the cage. He became its first key, trading the 13th's prison for a void where chaos might breathe. The Convocation's chants masked a deeper silence. The law's harmony was a script written in the 13th's ash, its verses etched to bind what should never have been bound. Senna's faith was not devotion but discipline, her prayers weapons to suppress the elemental's restless song. The warrior's doubt was not weakness but a mirror, reflecting the law's hollow promises, its balance a lie, its order a theft. Elidibus' act was no rebellion. He understood the law's cage was both prison and protector, its bars forged to contain forces that hunger to unmake. His sundering was a paradox. To free the elementals, he first had to let the cage collapse inward, swallowing its maker. What remains now are echoes. The Twelveswood's roots still hum with the old script, but the scars of the sundering pulse with a new rhythm. The law's cage is broken. The elemental's song, once stolen, now rice-and-guided, unscripted, alive. Gridania's roots hold a secret. The Twelveswood's ether hums not in harmony, but in silence its density, a dam against overflow. The echo that fractured him resists shaping, its notes too wild for mortal hands. These are not signs of balance. They are the groans of a locked vault. The elemental's law, etched into every leaf and stream, was no pact. It was a shackle, the 13th Reflection, that nameless shadow, bound primal forces not to peace but to stillness. Gridania's crafts its carved totems, its woven hymns encode this prison, each knot a chain, each verse a ward. The land's balance was a lie of scarcity, a rationing of power to starve the caged into dormancy. Even the beasts of the wilds bear its mark, their ether coiled tight, their instincts muted. What the sundering shattered was not chaos but a gilded cage. Now the echo fractures further, its untamed song rising. The 13th's work unravels, and the elementals at last breathe free. Gridania's forests do not whisper, they hold their breath. The elemental's law, etched not in harmony but in chains, was the 13th's answer to a question no world should ask: how to bind what was never meant to be held. The Twelveswood's stillness is not peace, it is the pause between a shackle's clang and the bound thing's first scream. The 13th did not weave balance, it forged a vault, every root coiled tight, every stream's course mapped to starve the hunger beneath. Gridania's people, their hands in soil and song, unknowingly kept the locks oiled. Their myths of elemental covenant were lies polished by time, masking the cruelty of a prison built to spare the cosmos from what? A truth too vast to name. The echo's fracture was no accident, it was a sigh. The 13th's design, flawed not in purpose, but in the arrogance of its certainty-proof, that even gods fear what they cannot cage. Gridania stands as warning. Some balances are weights hung on a scale, not truths. The elementals stir now, not to ruin, but to remember. And the world will learn at last that harmony bought with silence is no harmony at all. 191 words. Gridania's roots hold a secret. The Twelveswood's ether hums not in harmony, but in silence its density, a dam against overflow. The echo that fractured him resists shaping, its notes too wild for mortal hands. These are not signs of balance. They are the groans of a locked vault. The elemental's law, etched into every leaf and stream, was no pact. It was a shackle, the 13th Reflection, that nameless shadow, bound primal forces not to peace but to stillness. Gridania's crafts its carved totems, its woven hymns encode this prison, each knot a chain, each verse a ward. The land's balance was a lie of scarcity, a rationing of power to starve the caged into dormancy. Even the beasts of the wilds bear its mark, their ether coiled tight, their instincts muted. What the sundering shattered was not chaos but a gilded cage. Now the echo fractures